Beneath the floor was a hidden room and a secret her family never spoke about. The road narrowed until it felt like it might disappear completely. Margaret hadn't planned to stay long, just see the place, sign a few papers, and leave. But the moment her German shepherd stopped at the doorway, refusing to move, something shifted. The house didn't feel empty. It felt like it had been waiting. Have you ever walked into a place that felt like it knew you before you understood why? Margaret Ellis woke before the alarm, the way she always did. It was still dark outside, the kind of gray dark that sat heavy against the windows, neither night nor morning. She lay there for a moment, listening. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock on the kitchen wall. And beside the bed, the slow, steady breathing of Bruno. "All right," she murmured, her voice rough from sleep. "We're up." The dog's ears twitched before his eyes even opened. German shepherds didn't really wake up slowly. They shifted from stillness to alert in seconds. Bruno lifted his head, watching her as she swung her legs over the side of the bed. His tail thumped once against the floor. Just once, like a quiet acknowledgement. Same morning, same routine. Margaret shuffled into the kitchen, pulling her robe tighter around her shoulders. The linoleum floor was cold under her feet. It always was. She flicked on the light, and the room filled with a dull yellow glow. Nothing fancy. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a counter worn smooth from years of use. The coffee maker clicked on with a familiar sound. She didn't measure anymore, just poured until it felt right. Bruno followed her, nails tapping softly against the floor. He circled once, then settled near the door, where he always sat. Watching, waiting. That was his job now. "Nothing new today," she said, more out of habit than expectation. "Same as yesterday." He didn't respond, of course, but his ears stayed angled toward her, listening anyway. Margaret poured her coffee into a chipped mug. The steam rose slowly, carrying that bitter, comforting smell. She wrapped her hands around it and stood there, staring at nothing in particular. For years, her mornings had started earlier than this, back when she worked at the school in Toledo. Back when the halls echoed with footsteps and laughter and the sharp smell of cleaning solution lingered in the air. She used to arrive before anyone else. Unlock doors, sweep floors, make sure everything looked right before the day began. Now, no one noticed whether anything was right. She took a sip, too hot. She didn't mind. The apartment was quiet. It had been for a long time. No television, no radio, just the soft sounds of a place that didn't expect anything from her anymore. Bruno shifted slightly, then rested his chin on his paws, watching her again. "You've got it easy," she said, glancing down at him. "Food, walks, sleep. That's it." His tail moved once more, slower this time. Margaret sat down at the table. The chair creaked under her weight. It always did, same spot, same sound. She reached for the small stack of mail she hadn't bothered opening the night before. Bills, mostly. She flipped through them without much thought. Envelope after envelope. Electric, insurance, something from the pharmacy. Then her hand paused. The last envelope was different, thicker, official, her name printed in a sharper font. No return address she recognized. She frowned slightly, turning it over. The paper felt stiff between her fingers. "Probably nothing," she muttered. But she didn't open it right away. Instead, she took another sip of coffee. Let the moment stretch a little longer. Some habits were hard to break. Delay first, then deal with it. Bruno lifted his head again. Not tense, just attentive. Margaret finally set the mug down. "All right," she said quietly. She slid a finger under the flap and tore it open. The sound was louder than it should have been in the small kitchen. Inside was a folded document, and another sheet beneath it. Legal language, names, dates. She read slowly. Not because she couldn't understand, but because something about it didn't feel real. Estate of Eleanor Whitaker. Margaret blinked. That name. She hadn't heard it in years, not spoken, not written, just something that existed somewhere in the past, like a place you used to live but never went back to. Deceased. She kept reading. Sole beneficiary. Her lips pressed together slightly. Property located in rural. She stopped. Read that part again. Then once more. A house. Left to her. Not in Toledo, not anywhere near. Somewhere remote. The address meant nothing to her. Just a stretch of road she'd never heard of, buried somewhere in the hills. Margaret leaned back in her chair. The wood creaked again, louder this time. "Well," she said after a moment. Her voice didn't carry much feeling, just acknowledgement. Bruno stood up slowly, walking over to her. He placed his head gently against her knee. Not urgent, just there. She rested her hand on his neck without thinking. "Guess we've got a house," she said. The words sounded strange out loud. She glanced back down at the paper. The ink didn't change. The meaning didn't shift. It stayed the same no matter how long she looked at it. A grandmother she barely knew. A house she'd never seen. Left behind like something unfinished. Margaret exhaled softly. "Probably falling apart," she added. "Middle of nowhere. Nobody wants that." Her thumb rubbed absent circles into Bruno's fur. He didn't move, didn't react. But he didn't look away either. Margaret folded the letter carefully. Not out of sentiment, just habit. She slid it back into the envelope and set it on the table. "Well," she said again, standing up. "We'll take a look. Sell it. Be done with it." Simple. That's how things worked. You handled what came in front of you. You didn't go digging into things that had already passed. She rinsed her mug in the sink. The water ran a little too cold, a little too long. She didn't notice. Behind her, Bruno remained still, watching, waiting, like he already understood something she didn't. Margaret turned off the tap and wiped her hands on a towel. "Come on," she said. "We've got a drive to plan." The dog followed her out of the kitchen, his steps quiet, steady. And on the table, the envelope sat where she left it, unassuming, silent, but heavier than it had any right to be. Margaret didn't touch the envelope again that morning. She moved through the rest of her routine like always. Fed Bruno. Washed the dishes. Made the bed. Small things. Predictable things. The kind that didn't ask questions. But every so often, her eyes drifted back to the kitchen table. To that envelope. It stayed where she left it. Unmoved. Waiting. By late afternoon, she had packed a small bag. Nothing special. A change of clothes, a flashlight. A few canned goods she tossed in without thinking. She didn't plan on staying long, just enough to see the place. Talk to someone if needed. Get it listed. Quick trip, she muttered, zipping the bag. In and out. Bruno watched from the doorway. He stood a little straighter than usual. Not tense, just aware. Margaret grabbed her keys. The familiar jingle filled the quiet apartment. Come on. The word was enough. Bruno moved immediately, stepping toward the door with purpose. His tail didn't wag much, just a slight movement at the base, controlled. They left before sunset. The city slipped away faster than Margaret expected. At first, it was the usual. Traffic lights, storefronts, gas stations, the hum of people going about their day. She kept the radio off. She always did. Silence felt easier. Then the buildings thinned. The roads widened. And before long, even that changed. Pavement gave way to longer stretches of empty highway. Then smaller roads, fewer signs, fewer cars. By the time the sky turned a dull gray-blue, the world around her had started to feel quieter. Not peaceful, just empty. Margaret adjusted her grip on the steering wheel. The road ahead curved gently, disappearing behind thick lines of trees. The branches leaned inward, as if the forest was slowly reclaiming the space. Bruno sat upright in the passenger seat. He wasn't lying down like he usually did on long drives. His ears were forward. His eyes moved constantly, window to window, then back ahead. You okay? Margaret asked, glancing over. He didn't respond, of course, but his posture didn't change. She let out a breath. Probably just smells, she said. New place. But the words didn't sit right. The air outside looked different, darker, even though the sun hadn't fully set. The light filtered through the trees in uneven patches. Shadows stretched longer than they should. Margaret drove on. The road narrowed again. Gravel now. The sound changed under the tires. Less of a hum, more of a crunch. It echoed up through the car, steady and repetitive. No signal. She checked her phone out of habit. 1 bar, then none. Figures, she muttered, setting it back down. The farther they went, the more the world seemed to fold in on itself. No houses, no lights, just trees, and the road cutting through them like a thin scar. Bruno shifted suddenly. Not a full movement. Just a quick turn of his head toward the left window. Then a low sound escaped him. Not a growl, not quite a whine. Something in between. Margaret's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. What is it? She followed his gaze. Nothing. Just trees. Thick and still. The car passed the spot in seconds, but Bruno kept looking. His body angled slightly, as if he was trying to track something beyond the glass. Then, just as suddenly, he settled again, facing forward. Margaret swallowed. All right, she said quietly. Enough of that. The road curved again. A sign appeared up ahead, rusted, leaning. She slowed just enough to read it. The name meant nothing to her. Just a place she had no connection to, no memory of. And yet, she kept driving. A few miles later, the trees broke just enough to reveal a small building off to the side of the road. A store. Or what passed for one. One pump out front. Paint peeling. Windows clouded over. Margaret hesitated. Then she pulled in. The gravel lot crunched louder here, echoing in the stillness. She turned off the engine. For a moment, neither she nor Bruno moved. Then she reached for the door handle. "Stay," she said. Bruno didn't argue, but his eyes followed her as she stepped out. The air hit her immediately. Colder than she expected. Not sharp, just heavy, like it had been sitting still for too long. The door to the store creaked when she pushed it open. Inside, it smelled faintly of oil and old wood. A man stood behind the counter, older, thin, his posture slightly bent, but his eyes, clear, sharp. He looked up as the bell above the door rang. Margaret nodded politely. "Evening." He didn't answer right away, just watched her. His gaze moved from her face to her coat, then past her, through the window toward the car, toward Bruno, then back to her. "You're not from around here," he said finally. His voice was slow, measured. "No," Margaret replied, "just passing through." The man studied her for another moment. Then his expression shifted. Not friendlier, just something else. "What name?" he asked. Margaret hesitated. It wasn't a question she expected. "Ellis," she said. "Margaret Ellis." The man went still. Just for a second, then he gave a small nod. "Thought so." Margaret frowned slightly. "You know the name?" He leaned back a little, resting his hands on the counter. "Not you," he said, "but I knew someone who carried it." A pause. "The house up the road." Margaret felt something tighten in her chest. "That's where I'm headed." The man's eyes didn't leave hers. "Figured." Silence stretched between them. Margaret shifted her weight slightly. "Is there anything I should know?" she asked. The question came out more direct than she intended. The man glanced toward the door, toward the road, then back at her. "Road gets tricky past the bend," he said, "especially this time of year." Margaret nodded slowly. "I can handle that." "I'm sure you can." Another pause, then quieter. "That house, it's been standing a long time." Margaret waited. The man's gaze drifted again. Not to her this time. To something distant. "Long enough to remember things," he added. Margaret let out a small breath. "Look," she said, her voice firm but calm. "I'm just here to see it. Maybe sell it." The man nodded once. People always say that. Something about the way he said it made her uneasy. Not threatening, just certain. Margaret didn't respond. She turned toward the door. As she stepped outside, the cold air wrapped around her again. Bruno was already watching her through the window. The moment she opened the car door, he shifted, closer, alert. She slid into the driver's seat and shut the door. For a second, she just sat there, hands on the wheel. Then she exhaled. "All right," she said quietly. The engine started. The road waited. And as she pulled away, she could feel it. Not in anything she could see, not in anything she could name. But something in the air had changed, and Bruno knew it. Because this time, he didn't look away from the trees, not once. Margaret kept driving. The store disappeared behind her, swallowed by the curve of the road and the tightening walls of forest. The gravel track stretched ahead, thinner now, barely wide enough for two cars to pass. Branches hung low, brushing lightly against the sides of the vehicle with soft, dragging sounds. Bruno stayed upright, still. His eyes moved, but slowly now, like he was trying to understand something rather than react to it. "Almost there," Margaret said, though she wasn't sure if that was true. The address sat folded in the glove compartment. She hadn't looked at it again. The road felt like it was guiding her whether she checked or not. The light had changed. Not darker exactly, but flatter. Like the sky had pulled itself tight across the tops of the trees. Colors dulled. Greens turned gray. Browns turned almost black. The air inside the car felt heavier. Margaret cracked the window just a little. Cold air slipped in. Not fresh. Not crisp. Just still. She drove another mile, then 2. Then the road curved sharply to the right, and suddenly, the trees broke. Not completely, just enough. The land opened into a small clearing, uneven and overgrown, bordered by thin wooden fence posts leaning at odd angles. And there it was, the house. Margaret slowed the car without realizing it. Her foot eased off the gas. The engine dropped into a quiet hum. From a distance, the place didn't look abandoned. Not exactly. It stood tall enough. 2 stories. The roof sagged slightly on one side, but it hadn't collapsed. The windows were all still there, clouded but unbroken. The chimney rose straight against the fading sky. It looked tired, like something that had been holding itself together longer than it should have. Margaret pulled the car to a stop near the edge of the clearing. She didn't turn off the engine right away. Just sat there, hands resting on the wheel. Bruno didn't move. His body had gone completely still, ears forward, eyes fixed on the house. "All right," Margaret said quietly, but she didn't open the door. Not yet. Something about the place made her hesitate. It wasn't fear, not exactly. Just a feeling that she had arrived somewhere that didn't belong to her. Not yet. She turned off the engine. The silence came immediately. No distant traffic. No voices. No hum of anything familiar. Just wind. Soft. Moving through the trees. Margaret opened the door. The hinges creaked slightly. The cold air outside felt thicker than before. It pressed against her face as she stepped out, closing the door behind her. Bruno stayed inside for a moment, watching. Then he followed. His paws hit the ground softly. He stood beside her, his body angled slightly forward, weight balanced. Not relaxed. Not tense. Ready. Margaret looked at the house again. Up close, it felt different. The paint had long since faded to a dull gray. The wood beneath it showed through in places, rough and uneven. The porch leaned slightly to one side, the railing warped from years of weather. The front door stood closed. No movement. No sound. "Just a house," she said under her breath. But the words didn't settle. She stepped forward. The ground crunched beneath her shoes. Dry leaves mixed with gravel and dirt. The path to the porch was barely visible, swallowed by time and neglect. Bruno moved ahead of her. Not running. Not pulling. Just stepping forward with purpose. His nose low, taking in the ground, the air, the edges of the space. He paused halfway to the porch, lifted his head, and went still. Margaret stopped behind him. "What is it?" He didn't look back. His gaze fixed on the front door. Not aggressive, not barking, just watching. Margaret followed his line of sight. Nothing. The door remained closed. Still. She stepped past him. The porch groaned slightly as she climbed the steps. The wood flexed under her weight, but it held. She reached for the handle. Cold. Colder than it should have been. The metal felt like it had been sitting in shadow for years. She pulled. The door didn't open at first. Then, a soft shift. A reluctant give. The hinges creaked, long and low, as the door moved inward. The air inside spilled out. Stale, heavy, carrying a smell that made Margaret pause. Not rot. Not exactly. Something older. Dried herbs. Dust. And underneath it, a faint metallic scent. She stepped inside. The floorboards creaked beneath her immediately. The sound echoed through the space louder than expected. Bruno hesitated at the threshold, just for a second. Then he stepped in after her. His movements slower now. Measured. Margaret stood still, letting her eyes adjust. The room opened around her, a large central space that might have once been a living room. Furniture sat in place, covered with thin layers of dust, a table near the wall, a chair slightly pulled back, as if someone had just stood up. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing looked ransacked. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. Margaret moved forward. Each step careful. The air seemed thicker inside. As though it had nowhere to go, she reached out and brushed her fingers along the edge of the table. Dust came away in a fine layer, untouched, for years. Behind her, Bruno moved along the wall, sniffing, stopping, listening. His ears flicked at sounds Margaret couldn't hear. Then he turned sharply. Toward the hallway. A low sound escaped him. Not loud. Not threatening. Just uncertain. Margaret glanced toward him. "Bruno?" He didn't respond. Just stood there, staring down the hall. Margaret followed his gaze. The hallway stretched into shadow. Doors on either side. Closed. The light from the front room didn't reach far enough to show what lay beyond. Margaret felt something shift in her chest. A quiet tightening. Not panic. Just awareness. "This place," she murmured. But she didn't finish the thought. Instead, she took another step inside. Behind her, the door drifted slightly on its hinges. Not closing. Just moving enough to remind her. This wasn't a place that had been forgotten. It was a place that had been waiting, and Bruno knew it. Because he didn't take his eyes off the hallway. Not once. Margaret stood where she was for a moment longer. The house felt different now that she was inside it. Not colder. Not darker. Just heavier. Like the air had weight to it. Like it pressed gently against her skin and didn't quite move away. She let out a slow breath. "All right," she said quietly, more to herself than anything else. "We'll take a look around. That's it." Bruno didn't respond, but he shifted slightly, stepping closer to her leg. That was new. He wasn't the kind of dog that stayed close unless he needed to. Usually, he kept a comfortable distance, alert, independent, watching everything at once. Now, he stayed near. Margaret moved deeper into the room. The floor creaked under every step. Not sharp cracks, just long, drawn-out sounds, like the house adjusting to her presence. The kind of noise old buildings made when the temperature changed. She told herself that. The furniture sat exactly where it had always been. A sofa against the far wall, a small table beside it, a lamp with a cracked shade, tilted slightly to one side. No cobwebs stretched across the corners. No signs of animals. No real decay. Just time. A long time. Margaret reached for the back of a chair and brushed her hand across it. Dust came away in a thin layer, soft as powder. "Not falling apart," she murmured. "That's something." She walked toward the fireplace. It stood at the center of the room, built from stone darkened by years of use. Ash still sat in the basin, settled into a fine gray layer. She crouched slightly, studying it. No fresh marks, no disturbance, but it didn't look abandoned either. Just finished. Behind her, Bruno moved again. This time he crossed the room slowly, stopping near the entrance to the hallway. He lowered his head slightly, listened, then let out a soft, uncertain sound. Margaret straightened. "Hey," she said gently. "It's just a house." The words felt thin as soon as she said them. She walked toward him. The hallway stretched ahead, narrow and dim. The light from the main room barely reached the far end. Shadows clung to the walls, uneven and shifting with the movement of the fading daylight outside. Margaret stepped into it. The floor changed here, narrower boards, tighter beneath her feet. The sound of her steps echoed differently, more contained, more hollow. Doors lined both sides, all closed. She reached for the first one on the left. The knob turned easily. Inside, a small bedroom, bare mattress, no sheets, a wooden chair in the corner, a single window, its glass fogged with age. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. She checked the next room. Kitchen. A narrow space with a metal sink, a small stove, and cabinets that hung slightly crooked on their hinges. A kettle rested on one of the burners. A chipped plate sat beside it. Margaret frowned. It didn't look like someone had left in a hurry. It looked like someone had stepped out, expecting to return. She moved back into the hallway. Bruno hadn't followed her into the rooms. He stayed where he was, watching. Margaret glanced at him. "You coming?" He didn't move. Instead, he turned his head slightly, toward the far end of the hall. Margaret followed his gazon. The last door. It stood closed like the others. Nothing about it stood out. And yet, Bruno wouldn't look away. Margaret felt that same quiet tightening in her chest. Not fear. Just something she couldn't quite name. She stepped forward. Slowly. The floor creaked beneath her feet. The air felt cooler here. She reached for the knob, paused, then turned it. The door opened. Inside, another bedroom, larger than the others, a bed frame without a mattress, a dresser with one drawer slightly open, a rocking chair near the window. The chair moved slightly as the door opened, just a fraction, then stopped. Margaret stood still, watching it, waiting. Nothing else moved. No sound. No shift. She exhaled slowly. "Draft," she said under her breath. It made sense. Old houses had drafts. She stepped inside. The air smelled faintly different here. Not stronger, just sharper. Like something dried. Medicinal. She turned in a slow circle, taking it in. Nothing stood out. Nothing explained the feeling. Behind her, Bruno finally stepped into the room. Carefully. His paws landed softer here. He didn't move far. Just a few steps inside, then stopped. His body stayed angled toward the hallway, as if he didn't want to turn his back on it. Margaret noticed, but she didn't comment. Instead, she moved back toward the main room. The light had faded almost completely now. The windows showed only a dull gray blue, slipping toward darkness. She glanced at her watch, later than she expected. "All right," she said. "We'll stay the night. Head back in the morning." Simple. That was still the plan. She returned to the fireplace. Kneeling, she brushed aside the old ash and found a few pieces of dry wood stacked nearby. Enough to try. She struck a match. The flame flared briefly, small and steady. She held it to a piece of paper she found in a drawer. It caught slowly, then spread. The wood took longer. A faint crackle, a curl of smoke, then a small flame. Margaret leaned back slightly, watching it grow. The light shifted in the room. Shadows pulled back just enough to reveal more of the space. Bruno moved closer. He circled once near the fire, then lowered himself onto the floor. Not fully relaxed, but closer. Margaret wrapped herself in an old blanket she found draped over the back of the couch. It smelled faintly of dust and something older, but it was warm. She sat down. The fire flickered in front of her. The house creaked around her, softly, steadily, like it was breathing. Time passed. She wasn't sure how much. The fire settled into a low burn, steady and quiet. The wind picked up outside. It moved through the trees, brushing against the walls, slipping through the edges of the structure. At times, it sounded like a long, drawn-out sigh. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Something shifted, a faint sound. Not from outside, from inside. A soft tap, somewhere deeper in the house. She held still, listened. Nothing. Just the fire. Just the wind. She exhaled slowly. "Old wood," she said again. Bruno lifted his head, ears forward. The same sound came again, softer this time, almost deliberate. Margaret didn't move, didn't speak. The house settled again. Silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It felt closer. Margaret pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The firelight flickered across the walls. Shadows moved slowly, not independently, just following the flame. She kept her eyes on them anyway, waiting for something to be out of place. Nothing was. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with her. Her body sank into the couch. Her eyes grew heavy. The sounds of the house blended together. Wind, wood, fire, and somewhere between one breath and the next, she drifted off. Bruno didn't. He stayed where he was, head lifted, eyes open, watching the hallway, listening all night, without moving. Not once. Morning came slowly. A pale gray light slipped through the windows, soft and thin, barely strong enough to push back the shadows. The fire in the hearth had burned down to a bed of ash, faint warmth still lingering in the stones. Margaret stirred on the couch. Her neck ached. Her back, too. Sleeping like that always came with a cost. She opened her eyes and blinked, adjusting to the dim light. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the smell came back. Dust. Old wood. That faint, dry scent that clung to the air. The house. She pushed herself up slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The room looked different in daylight. Less threatening, but not entirely safe. Just clearer. Bruno was still there, in the same spot. He stood near the hallway now, not lying down anymore. His posture was rigid, alert, his ears fixed forward. He hadn't slept. Margaret watched him for a second. "You stayed up all night?" she asked softly. His tail moved once, barely, but he didn't look at her. His attention remained locked on something else. Margaret followed his gaze. The hallway. Still quiet, still empty. She rubbed her hands together, trying to bring warmth back into her fingers. "All right," she said, her voice low. "Let's get moving." Routine. That was what she needed. She stepped into the kitchen, searching for anything useful. The cabinets creaked as she opened them. Most were empty. A few held scattered items, old jars, a rusted can opener, nothing worth keeping. She found a small kettle, filled it halfway with water from her bottle, set it on the stove, though she knew it wouldn't heat without gas. She didn't expect it to. It was just something to do, and behind her, Bruno shifted. A sharp movement. Margaret turned. He had moved into the kitchen, but he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the floor, near the far corner. His body had changed. Lower now, focused, intent. He stepped forward, sniffed once, then again. Then his paw hit the floor, scratching. Not playful, not random. Deliberate. Rhythmic. Margaret frowned. "Hey," she said, "stop that." Bruno didn't. His nails scraped against the wood, quick and controlled. He paused once, head tilting slightly, as if listening, then continued. Margaret stepped closer. "What are you—" She stopped. The sound changed. Not just wood. Hollow. A different echo beneath the surface. She crouched slowly, brushing her hand over the area Bruno was digging at. The floor looked normal at first glance. Same worn boards, same dull finish. But as her fingers moved across it, she felt it. A slight difference. A raised edge. Barely noticeable. She leaned in closer. The nails here looked newer, cleaner, less worn than the others. Margaret's breath slowed. "All right," she murmured. Bruno stepped back slightly, giving her space, but his eyes never left the spot. Margaret pressed her fingers along the seam there. A faint line. Square. She stood up, scanning the room. "Hold on," she said. She moved back into the main room, searching through drawers, corners, anything that might help. After a minute, she found an old metal tool, something like a flat pry bar, rusted but still solid. She returned to the kitchen. Bruno hadn't moved, still watching, still waiting. Margaret knelt again, positioned the edge of the tool along the seam. She hesitated, just for a second. then pushed. The wood resisted at first. Then, a shift, a soft crack. The board lifted slightly. Dust fell from the edges, rising in a thin cloud. Margaret coughed once, waving it away. "Okay," she said quietly. She adjusted her grip and pulled harder. The section of floor came up slowly, revealing darkness beneath. A square opening, no larger than a small hatch. Cold air rose from it immediately, different from the rest of the house. Drier, stiller. Margaret leaned back slightly. Her heart beat a little faster now. Not fear, just awareness. "What is this?" she whispered. Bruno stepped forward again. "Careful." He lowered his head, sniffing the edge of the opening. His ears flicked once, then settled forward again. No growling, no hesitation, just focus. Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out the flashlight. Her fingers felt colder now. She clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness. Wooden steps, narrow, leading down, not deep, but enough to disappear into shadow. Margaret swallowed. "A crawl space," she said. But it didn't feel like one. Crawl spaces weren't built like this. Not this clean, not this intentional. She angled the light further. The beam caught something below, a flat surface, a table maybe, or a box. She couldn't tell. Bruno shifted again. He placed one paw on the edge, then another. Careful, measured. Margaret reached out, placing a hand on his back. "Easy," she said. He paused, looked back at her for the first time since morning. His eyes were calm, steady, not afraid, not aggressive, just certain. Margaret felt something settle in her chest, a quiet decision. "All right," she said. She took a breath, then swung her legs over the edge. The wood creaked softly under her weight as she lowered herself onto the first step. The air below felt cooler, closer. She tightened her grip on the flashlight. Behind her, Bruno followed, one step at a time, silent. They descended together into something the house had kept hidden for a very long time. And now, it was open, because he wouldn't ignore it. Not once. The steps creaked under Margaret's weight. Each one gave a little, then settled. The sound echoed upward, swallowed quickly by the narrow opening above. The light from the kitchen faded behind her, replaced by the tight beam of her flashlight cutting through the dark. Bruno followed close, not pressing against her, but close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. His breathing was steady, controlled. He wasn't afraid. That mattered. Margaret reached the bottom. The floor beneath her boots was firm. Not dirt, not loose boards. Packed. Finished. She lifted the flashlight. The beam moved slowly across the space. And then, she stopped. This wasn't a crawl space. It wasn't storage. It was a room. Small, yes. The ceiling low enough that she had to keep her head slightly bent. But the walls, lined with wood, smooth in places, reinforced, built, deliberately. "Someone made this," she whispered. Her voice sounded different down here, softer, as if the room absorbed it instead of letting it carry. Bruno stepped off the last stair and moved ahead of her. His nose lowered immediately. He traced the edges of the space, wall to wall, corner to corner. His movements were slower now, careful, respectful. Margaret turned the light again. The beam landed on a narrow cot against one wall. A thin mattress, covered with a folded blanket. Dust had settled over it, but not thickly. Not like the rest of the house. Nearby, a small wooden table. On it, a metal cup, an oil lamp, and a stack of notebooks. Margaret's breath caught. She stepped forward slowly. Her hand hovered over the table before finally touching it. The surface was dry, clean almost, as if the air down here had kept time from settling the same way. She picked up one of the notebooks. The leather cover was worn, but intact, soft under her fingers. She opened it. The pages were yellowed, but not brittle. The ink had faded slightly, but still readable. Names, dates, short entries. She read one. January 12th. Woman, mid-30s. Arrived after dusk. Injured foot. Stayed 2 nights. Margaret frowned. She turned the page. January 18th. Boy, maybe 12. No coat. Wouldn't speak. Left before sunrise. Another page. February 2nd. Couple. Said nothing. Shared food. Kept fire low. Margaret's hand tightened slightly on the edge of the paper. She flipped through more. Line after line. Names, descriptions, conditions, all written in the same careful hand. Quiet. Precise. No extra words. Just record. "What is this?" she murmured. Bruno paused beside her. He lifted his head slightly, ears shifting as if catching something far away. Then he settled again. Margaret set the notebook down, reached for another. Different handwriting. Older, maybe. But the same pattern. People coming, staying, leaving. Always at night. Always quiet. Margaret turned slowly. Her flashlight moved across the rest of the room. Shelves, low, built into the wall. On them. Supplies. Canned goods, some rusted, some still intact. Folded blankets. A small medical kit. Bandages. Glass bottles with labels she couldn't quite read. Everything placed with purpose. Nothing scattered. Nothing forgotten. "This wasn't storage," she said, more firmly now. Bruno stepped toward the cot. He sniffed the edge of the blanket. Paused. Then moved on. Margaret followed his movement. At the far corner, something caught the light. A small object. Resting on the floor, half tucked against the wall. She crouched down, picked it up. Leather. Worn smooth. A collar. Too small for Bruno. Old. Very old. She turned it in her hands. The buckle had darkened with age but still held. Her fingers traced the edge of it slowly. "Someone else was down here," she said softly. Bruno sat. Not lying down. Just sitting, watching her. Calm. Steady. Margaret placed the collar back where she found it. Then stood. Her eyes moved around the room again, taking it in. The cot, the table, the journals, the supplies. A pattern began to form, not fully clear, but enough. "This was for people," she said. Not a guess, a realization. Bruno's ears lifted slightly at the change in her tone. Margaret stepped back toward the table, picked up the first notebook again. Read another entry. March 10th. Woman and child. Fever. Stayed 3 nights. Left before dawn. Her throat tightened slightly. Not from fear, from something else. Something heavier. This house, she murmured. She didn't finish the sentence, but she understood now. Or at least, she was starting to. The room wasn't hidden to keep things out. It was hidden to keep people safe. She closed the notebook gently, set it back in place. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in her hand. Not from cold, from the shift inside her. Everything she thought about this place, about the house, about the woman who left it to her. It wasn't lining up anymore. Bruno stood. He moved back toward the stairs, then stopped. Looked at her, not pulling, not urging, just waiting. Margaret took one last look around. The room remained still, unchanged, but no longer empty. She stepped toward the stairs, placed her foot on the first step. The wood creaked softly. Bruno followed behind her this time. Close. As they climbed back up, the air shifted again. Warmer, lighter. But something from below stayed with her. Not the cold, not the dark, the meaning. When she reached the top, she pulled herself back into the kitchen. The light felt different now. Brighter than it should have. Bruno stepped out behind her. He shook himself once as if clearing something from his coat, then settled near the opening. Margaret stood there, looking down into the hidden space. The room beneath remained silent. Still, but no longer unknown. She reached for the loose board, paused, then lowered it back into place. The wood settled with a soft, final sound. Not sealing it, just covering it. For now. Margaret straightened. Her eyes moved slowly across the kitchen, then toward the rest of the house. This wasn't just a house, she said quietly. Bruno lay down beside her. For the first time since they arrived, completely at ease. And that told her something had changed. Even if she couldn't fully explain it yet, something had been uncovered. Not just beneath the floor, but beneath everything she thought she understood. And it wasn't finished. Not even close. Margaret stayed in the kitchen for a long time after closing the floor. She didn't move right away. Just stood there, one hand resting lightly on the wood where the opening had been, as if she could still feel the space beneath it. The quiet. The intention. Bruno lay beside her. For the first time since they arrived, his body had softened. His head rested on his paws, eyes half closed, but not asleep. Just calm. That, more than anything, unsettled her. Feels different now, doesn't it? She said quietly. Bruno didn't answer, but his tail gave a slow, steady tap against the floor. Margaret stepped back. The kitchen looked the same as before. Same cabinets, same worn table, same faint smell of dust and old wood. But it didn't feel the same. She moved into the main room. The light outside had faded again. Evening had come without her noticing. The windows reflected the dim interior now, ghosted images of furniture and shadows layered over the darkening trees beyond. The fire from the night before was gone. Cold. Margaret knelt again, rebuilding it from what little wood she had gathered. This time, the flame caught faster. The crackle came easier, as if the house remembered the process. She sat back on the couch, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders again. Bruno moved closer to the fire. He circled once, then settled down, this time fully. His eyes closed. For real. Margaret watched him for a moment. "You're all right now," she murmured. It wasn't a question, and somehow that made her feel steadier too. The fire warmed the room slowly. The walls seemed to ease around it. The sounds of the house softened, no longer sharp or uncertain, just part of the rhythm of the place. Margaret leaned back. Her eyes drifted to the hallway again. Still. Quiet. No longer pulling at her the same way. She let out a long breath. "Just get through the night," she said softly. "Then figure things out in the morning." Simple. That was still the plan. She closed her eyes for a moment. Not sleep. Just rest. The fire crackled. The wind moved outside. Time passed. She wasn't sure how long. Then, a sound. Sharp. Clear. Margaret's eyes snapped open. 3 knocks. From the front door. Not loud, but deliberate. She didn't move right away. Her body stayed still, listening. Nothing followed. Just silence again. Bruno lifted his head. Instantly alert, but not barking, not growling, just listening. The knock came again. 3 times, same rhythm. Margaret's heart beat faster now. Not panic, but awareness. Someone was out there, at this hour, in a place like this. She stood slowly. The floor creaked beneath her feet. Bruno rose with her. His body positioned slightly ahead now. Protective, but not aggressive. Margaret moved toward the door. Each step measured. Careful. The fire behind her cast long shadows across the floor. The door stood where she had left it. Closed. Still. She reached for the handle. Paused. Her hand hovered there for a second. Then she pulled it open. Cold air rushed in. Sharp this time. Different from before. And on the porch, a man. Mid-30s, maybe. Hard to tell in the dim light. His coat was dusted with snow. His face pale. Breath visible in the air. He looked up at her quickly, eyes wide. Not with fear exactly, but exhaustion. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't know if anyone lived out here." Margaret didn't answer right away. She studied him. His hands trembled slightly. His clothes were damp. Not staged. Not rehearsed. Real. "My truck," he added, nodding vaguely toward the road. "Slid off a ways back. I saw the light." He glanced past her, toward the fire, then back at her. "I just need to warm up. I'll leave in the morning." Bruno stood at Margaret's side, still, watching. His posture told her everything. No tension, no warning, just attention. Margaret exhaled slowly. Her mind moved quickly now. The journals, the entries, the people who had come here before. Unannounced. At night. In need. She stepped aside. "Come in," she said. The man hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Thank you." He stepped over the threshold. Snow fell from his boots onto the wooden floor, melting instantly. The cold followed him in. Margaret closed the door behind him. The lock clicked softly. The man moved toward the fire, slow at first, then closer. He held his hands out, letting the heat reach them. "Thought I was going to be out there all night," he said quietly. Margaret watched him, didn't ask questions, didn't need to. Bruno circled once behind the man, sniffed, then settled again near the edge of the room, calm. Margaret moved to the kitchen, poured what little warm water she had left into a cup, brought it back. "Here." The man took it with both hands. "Thank you," he said again. His voice softer now. They sat in silence. The fire filled the space between them. Outside, the wind picked up again, moving through the trees, pressing lightly against the walls. Margaret glanced toward the door, then back at the man. "You can stay there," she said, nodding toward the chair. He nodded. "Just until morning." She didn't respond. Bruno lowered his head again, but this time he didn't close his eyes completely. Not fully, just enough to rest, but still aware, still present. Margaret sat back down, the blanket around her shoulders, the fire in front of her, the stranger across the room. And for the first time since arriving, the house didn't feel empty. It felt used, as if something had been set back into motion, quietly, naturally, like it had never really stopped. And she had just stepped into the middle of it, without even realizing. Until now. The fire burned low but steady. Its light filled the room with a soft, uneven glow, catching on the edges of the furniture and the dust that still lingered in the air. Outside, the wind had settled into something quieter, a long, slow movement through the trees. Margaret sat on the couch, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes drifted between the flames and the man across from her. He hadn't said much after warming his hands, just a few quiet words, enough to explain, not enough to invite questions. He leaned back in the chair now, his body loosening as the warmth reached him. His eyes closed briefly, then opened again, as if he didn't fully trust sleep to take him. Bruno watched him, not closely. Not the way he had watched the house before, just enough to keep track. That told Margaret something. "He's all right," she said softly. Bruno's ears flicked once, then settled. The man exhaled slowly. "I appreciate this," he said. "Most people wouldn't have opened the door." Margaret didn't answer. She just looked at the fire. "I wasn't sure you would either," he added. That made her glance up. "Neither was I," she said. It was the truth. He nodded, didn't press further. Silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It had shape now, presence. The house didn't feel like it was watching anymore. It felt listening. Time passed. The fire burned lower. The man's breathing grew slower, more even. At some point, he fell asleep. Not fully relaxed, but enough. Margaret stayed awake. Her thoughts didn't settle. They moved, quietly, through everything she had seen. The room beneath the floor, the journals, the names, the pattern, and now, this. A stranger, at night, in need. Her eyes drifted toward the kitchen, toward the floor. She didn't plan it, but after a while, she stood, slowly, careful not to wake him. Bruno lifted his head as she moved, watched her, but didn't follow. Margaret stepped into the kitchen. The boards beneath her feet felt different now. She knew what was under them. She knelt, ran her hand along the seam again, felt it clearly this time. No hesitation. She lifted the board, set it aside. The opening revealed itself again. Dark. Still. Waiting. She reached for the flashlight, clicked it on. The beam cut down into the hidden space. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. She lowered herself carefully onto the steps, one at a time. The air below greeted her again. Dry, still, quiet in a way that felt complete, not empty. Bruno appeared at the top of the opening. He didn't come down this time, just stood there, watching. Margaret reached the bottom. Her flashlight moved across the room. The cot, the table, the shelves, the journals. She stepped toward them again. More slowly now, more deliberately. She picked up the first notebook she had opened before, flipped through it, then set it aside, reached for another. This one was thinner, the cover worn more heavily. She opened it. The handwriting was the same, but the entries were different. Longer, more detailed. She read the first line. November 3rd. The snow came early this year. I've stocked what I can. If anyone comes, there will be enough. Margaret's breath slowed. She turned the page. November 10th. A man arrived just after midnight. Said nothing. Hands shaking. Stayed by the fire until morning. She paused. The words settled differently now. Not just records. Memories. She turned another page. November 15th. I keep the light low. Too much draws attention. But it must be seen. Enough to guide. Not enough to expose. Margaret's fingers tightened slightly on the paper. She flipped again. December 2nd. They came with a child this time. Fever. I did what I could. The ink pressed harder into the page. December 5th. They left before dawn. Didn't say goodbye. Margaret exhaled slowly. The room felt closer, not smaller, just more present. She kept reading, page after page. Each one carried the same quiet tone. No complaint, no fear, just action. And then, near the back, she found something different. A folded piece of paper tucked between the pages, thicker than the rest. Newer. Her fingers hesitated, then pulled it free. The fold opened slowly. The paper crackled slightly. The handwriting, different. Cleaner. More deliberate. Margaret stared at it for a long moment, then read, If you're reading this, then you found what I hoped you would. Her breath caught. She read on. I didn't leave this house to you by accident. Margaret swallowed. Her eyes moved faster now. I watched from a distance. Not closely. Just enough to know the kind of life you lived. Her hand trembled slightly. You never asked for much. You never took more than you needed. And you never turned away from someone who needed help, even when no one saw it. Margaret blinked. The words blurred for a second. She steadied herself, kept reading. That matters more than anything I could have left behind. Her chest tightened. I couldn't teach you this. You already knew it. You just didn't know what to call it. Margaret lowered the paper slightly. Her eyes stared at nothing, then lifted again. The last line. This house is not meant to be owned. It is meant to be kept. Silence filled the room. Not empty, not distant. Just full. Margaret folded the paper slowly. Her hands moved carefully, as if the act itself required attention. She looked around the room again, at everything. The journals, the supplies, the cot, the space. It all made sense now. Not fully, but enough. She wasn't here by chance. Bruno shifted above her, a soft sound, calling her back. Margaret tucked the letter into her coat, then stepped toward the stairs. As she climbed, the air changed again. Warmer, lighter. But she carried something with her now. Something she hadn't come here with. At the top, she stepped back into the kitchen. Bruno moved aside to let her through, then followed. This time, right beside her. Not ahead, not behind. Together. Margaret placed the board back over the opening. The wood settled into place. She stood. Still. For a moment. Then turned back toward the main room. The fire was lower now. The man still slept. Nothing had changed on the surface, but everything had shifted underneath. Margaret sat back down. The letter pressed lightly against her chest. Bruno settled at her feet. And for the first time, she understood why the house had waited, and why it had been given to her, not as something to take, but as something to continue. Margaret sat by the fire until the sky began to lighten. She didn't sleep, not really. Her eyes closed once or twice, but her mind stayed awake, turning things over, quietly, carefully. The letter rested in her coat pocket. She could feel it there without touching it, like something steady. Bruno didn't leave her side. He stayed close, calm, no longer watching the walls or the hallway. No tension in his body. Just presence. When morning finally came, it didn't rush in. It crept. Soft light through the windows, pale and thin, enough to outline the room, to separate shapes from shadow. The man stirred first, a small shift in the chair, a breath drawn deeper than before. Margaret looked up. He blinked slowly, adjusting to the light. For a moment he looked disoriented. Then his gaze found the fire, the room, her. He sat up straighter. "Morning," he said, his voice rough but clearer now. "Morning," Margaret replied. He rubbed his hands together, glancing toward the door. "I should get moving," he said, "before the roads get worse." Margaret nodded. No questions. No hesitation. He stood, pulling his coat tighter around him. The fabric had dried some overnight, but it still carried the cold with it. He paused near the door, turned back slightly. "I don't know what I would have done if this place hadn't been here," he said quietly. Margaret met his eyes. For a second, something passed between them. Not familiarity, not connection, just understanding. She gave a small nod. You got through the night, she said. He let out a faint breath. Because you opened the door. Margaret didn't answer that. He stepped outside. The cold rushed in briefly, then softened as the door closed behind him. She watched through the window. His figure moved across the clearing, footsteps faint in the frost-covered ground. The trees waited beyond him. Still. Silent. Then he was gone. Just like that, Margaret stood there a while longer, watching the space he had left behind. Bruno came up beside her. His gaze followed the same line. Then he looked back at her. Margaret exhaled slowly. Well, she said. But the word didn't carry the same meaning it had before. She turned away from the door. The house felt different again. Not quiet in the way it had been when she arrived. Not heavy, just settled. As if it had accepted something, or maybe as if she had. She moved into the kitchen. The floor beneath her feet no longer felt uncertain. She knew what was under it, and she knew what it meant. She reached for the kettle again, filled it with water, set it down. Not because it would heat, but because it belonged there. Because it was part of something. Bruno followed her movements, not leading, not guarding, just present. Margaret stepped back into the main room. The fire had burned down again. She crouched beside it, added more wood, struck a match. This time the flame caught immediately. No hesitation, no struggle. It rose steady, bright. Margaret watched it for a moment, then sat back. Her eyes moved around the room, the chair, the table, the doorway. All of it looked the same. But it didn't feel temporary anymore. That thought stayed with her. She reached into her coat, pulled out the letter, unfolded it again. Read it slowly. This time she didn't rush. She let each line settle. Let it sit where it needed to. When she finished, she folded it carefully, placed it back. Then she looked toward her bag, still sitting near the wall, packed, ready. For a moment she considered it. The drive back, the call to the agent, the simple plan she had walked in with. Sell the place, be done, move on. She stood, walked to the bag, bent down, and unzipped it. Slowly, she took out her clothes, set them aside, then the canned food, then the flashlight. Everything she had packed with the intention of leaving. She placed it all on the table, not in a hurry, not with hesitation. Just one piece at a time. Bruno watched her, his head tilted slightly, not confused, just curious. Margaret zipped the empty bag shut, then set it down. She looked around the room again, took it in, fully. This place, she said quietly, then stopped, because she didn't need to finish it. Not yet. A sound came from outside, soft. Footsteps. Not the man from before. Different. Lighter. Slower. Margaret turned toward the door. Bruno stood. Not tense, but alert. The knock came. Not sharp. Not urgent. Just there. Margaret stepped forward, opened the door. A woman stood on the porch, older, wrapped in a heavy coat. her face lined but steady. She looked at Margaret for a moment, then gave a small nod. "You must be her granddaughter," the woman said. Margaret didn't answer right away. But she didn't deny it either. The woman's gaze moved past her, into the house, toward the fire, then back again. "Good," she said softly. "It's about time someone came back." Margaret felt something shift again. Not confusion, not doubt. Something steadier. "Can I help you?" she asked. The woman gave a small, knowing look. "You already are," she said. Then she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a small bundle, wrapped in cloth, held it out. "Thought you might need this." Margaret hesitated, then took it. The cloth felt worn, used, familiar in a way she couldn't explain. "Thank you," she said. The woman nodded, then turned, walking back toward the path. No explanation, no questions, just leaving. Margaret watched her go, the same way she had watched the man. Different steps, same quiet departure. When the woman disappeared into the trees, Margaret closed the door. She stood there, holding the bundle. Bruno came closer, sniffed it lightly, then looked up at her. Margaret unwrapped it slowly. Inside, nails, old, but clean, useful. She let out a quiet breath, set them on the table, then looked around the house again. This time, not as something she had inherited, but as something that was already in motion, already alive, and waiting for her to decide if she was going to walk away or stay. Margaret turned toward the fire, sat down. Bruno lay beside her. The house settled around them, and for the first time, she didn't think about leaving, not even once. The days that followed didn't come all at once. They unfolded, slowly, one morning at a time. Margaret woke earlier now, not out of habit, but because the house seemed to expect it. The light through the windows came softer here. The air carried the faint scent of wood and ash instead of dust. The fire was the first thing she checked, always. Some mornings it had gone out completely. Other times, faint embers waited beneath the ash, just enough to bring it back with a little care. She learned quickly how to stack the wood, how to let it breathe, how to keep it going without wasting it. Bruno stayed close, not restless anymore, not watching the walls. He moved through the house like he belonged there, like he understood the rhythm before she did. He took his place near the door most of the time, lying down, head low but alert, always aware. Margaret noticed that. "You've made up your mind," she said to him one morning. He didn't answer. But he didn't need to. Outside, the land changed slowly. The frost lifted, the ground softened. The path leading up to the house became clearer with each passing day. She walked it often now, clearing branches, moving stones, making it easier to see where it led. The fence posts still leaned. The porch still sagged slightly. But little by little, she fixed what she could. The nails the woman had brought were the first thing she used. Old, but strong. They held. That mattered. The house responded, not in any way she could explain, but it did. The doors opened easier. The floors settled under her steps instead of protesting. The air moved differently, Less trapped, more alive. Margaret didn't question it. She just kept working, sometimes alone, sometimes not. The older woman came back once, then again. She didn't stay long, just enough to talk, to point out where the roof needed attention, where the wood needed reinforcing. She never asked questions about why Margaret stayed. She didn't need to. Others came too, quietly. A man with tools who fixed a loose hinge without saying much. A boy who left a bundle of firewood by the door and disappeared before Margaret could thank him. No one made announcements. No one explained. They just showed up. And then they were gone. The house filled with small signs of use again. A cup left on the table. A blanket folded near the fire. Footsteps that came and went. Bruno adjusted to it easily. He didn't bark when people arrived. He didn't growl, he simply stood, watched, and decided. And when he settled, Margaret trusted it. Time passed, not marked by days anymore, but by change. The porch stood straighter, the windows cleared, the path widened. Inside, the fire never stayed out for long. Margaret kept the journals close. She read them often, not all at once, just pieces. A name here, a story there. Each one quiet, each one real. She added her own entries too. At first she didn't know why, just small notes. Man, mid-30s, cold, stayed one night. Woman, older, brought nails. Simple, like the ones before her. It felt right. One evening the snow came again, soft, slow, falling across the clearing in a thin, steady curtain. Margaret stood by the window, watching it. Bruno lay near the door, head up, ears forward, waiting. She didn't ask why. She knew. The knock came just after dark. 3 times. Clear, steady. Margaret turned. Walked to the door without hesitation. Her hand rested on the handle. No pause. No second thought. She opened it. Cold air rushed in. And there, another stranger. Younger this time. Shivering. Eyes tired. Looking at the light behind her like it was the only thing that mattered. Margaret stepped aside. "Come in," she said. Simple. Natural. The man nodded quickly, stepped inside. The warmth reached him immediately. Bruno stood, watched, then settled. Margaret closed the door. The lock clicked softly. The fire crackled. The house held. She moved back toward the hearth, added another piece of wood, watched the flame catch. Bright, steady. The room filled with light. Not harsh, not overwhelming. Just enough. Margaret sat down, the blanket around her shoulders, Bruno at her feet. The stranger across from her, and the house. Alive. Not in a way that could be explained, but in a way that could be felt. Outside, the snow covered the path again, erasing footsteps, quieting the world. Inside, the fire burned on, unbroken. Margaret looked at it for a long moment, then leaned back slightly. Not tired, not restless, just settled. For most of her life, she had moved through days that passed without leaving a mark. Quiet work, small acts, things no one remembered. But here, those same things mattered. They had always mattered. She just hadn't seen where they belonged. Now she did, and she didn't need anything more than that. The fire shifted. The wood cracked softly. Bruno let out a slow breath, and Margaret stayed where she was, not waiting for something to happen. Not wondering what came next, just holding what was already there and keeping it lit.
The fire gives quiet bob, and the dog shifted closer, his head resting against her boot like he's finally done watching the door. For the first time, she doesn't look past him, doesn't question the silence, doesn't wonder if she's in the wrong place. She almost felt it was unopened, the ladder, the house, the space beneath the floor. But he didn't rush in, didn't park. He stopped and waited until she nodded. And that's what stayed with her, not the hidden room, not the people who passed through, just that spouse. The moment something in her life asked to be seen, and she didn't work past in this time. Most people have something like that. A door we tell ourselves doesn't matter. A place that feels too quiet mean anything until something, someone refuses to let us ignore it. The dog lifted his head once, listening, then settled again. If he hadn't stopped that day, would she have kept walking past it like she had everything else?